to be seen. Okay, so welcome to Help Desk Live, episode 36. So today we have Noel Lopez, who is an independent game designer, and I have my students that are on the help desk who have been working on a game, so that was the purpose of us having this conversation with him. So I think it's probably too many students for us to introduce everyone, but I'll just have like my game group introduce themselves, and then I'll have Mr. Lopez introduce himself, and we'll just get started. So guys, do you want to just introduce yourselves real quick in the gaming group?
All right, I'm Akash.
Bilal.
Brendan.
Dan.
Libby.
Ben.
Oh, I'm Ben.
So yeah, sorry, I'll try to pan around also. So we definitely have a much bigger group here, so I apologize we don't have like a better system. So that was Ben, and let's see.
All right.
Let's see everybody else.
All right. Quite a few people. Cool.
Yes, definitely. All right. So, all right, guys. Or I'm sorry, Mr. Lopez. Do you want to just introduce yourself? I don't know if you want to say a little bit about yourself, and then we'll jump into the questions.
Sure. So I've been a game programmer / designer for a long time now. I started working in the games industry in 1998. And then like 11 years ago, I decided that I was done working for other people and other big companies, and went independent on my own. And I've been independent ever since then. I've been very lucky with some of the projects that I've made, which in this day and age, that you definitely need a lot of luck to make any money out of games. And I'm still doing it. So that's about it.
Great, thank you. I neglected to introduce someone else. Lizabeth Narsik, do you want to just
Hello.
say hello?
Hello.
Miss Narsik. I teach computer science here.
Oh, okay.
So we thought it would make sense for her students to also, participate in the video conference with you. So that's why.
Right.
Here, so okay. All right.
Sounds good.
Guys, I'll throw it back to you, and you can start asking the questions.
All right, well, I'm sure we're all itching to know what inspired you to really become a game developer.
It's kind of like what I've always done all my life. It sounds weird, but ever since I got a computer, which back then was like these 8-bit computers, the moment I saw one, I'm like, oh, those games are awesome. How do I make one, right? And in school, during high school and in college and all of that, I would just do my homework. I would do my classes, because back then we wouldn't have computer classes. And then when I was done with the homework and stuff, I would go and try to make my own games and figure out how to make games, or be like hacking existing games to figure out how they did things and things like that. So it was kind of like my passion that I always did. And even when I finished my master's, I initially thought like, well, I guess I'll finish this and I'll be a regular software engineer and do something. And before it's like, well, what the heck? Let's try. Maybe somebody will pay me to make games. Wouldn't that be hilarious? So before I went into a regular software engineering job search, I applied to a bunch of game companies, and that's how I started.
All right.
So my question is, what do you use to make games, like in terms of language, art, and like the engine itself?
Okay. All right. Actually, that has a long answer. Let me start with a short one. I'm kind of old school with that, so I just use the simplest things that work for me. And also because my needs right now are very different than game development teams that are making Grand Theft Auto 5 or something. I mean, those are teams with like 300, 400 people, and they spend 3 years doing a game. So it's going to be very different than me right now, which is usually 2 people, and we spend a year or 2 years doing a game. So I keep things as simple as possible. That means pretty much straight C, OpenGL on the programming side. On the art side, that's the thing that I do the least. So you should partner up with somebody who does the art. Photoshop is kind of a standard in there, although it can be overkill. I think right now my partner is using a couple different programs that are more suited to the art style that he's using, more like comic book style. So more vector things for like preserving line widths and things like that. And what was the other
Oh,
for something else?
engine.
So
Oh, engine. So I just use kind of like my own libraries, and then pretty much code that I've written in the past, and then bring in existing libraries for certain things. Like I'll use SDL, for example, or I'll use like an HTTP library. So I pick libraries for whatever the things that I need. Now that was a short version. The long version of the, or maybe this is the short version. The other version of the answer is like, it doesn't really matter the tools that I use. Like I think I used to be very focused, like, oh my god, what tools am I using and whatnot. Especially today, there are so many tools, there are so many languages, there are so many ways of making games that honestly, at the very beginning, especially when you're just learning to make games, it doesn't matter which tool you use. It's a tool that you need to be comfortable with. If you already know a language, use that language. You can make games in C, but you can make them in Java and C++, in Python, in JavaScript, and like really in whatever. The engine, whether you use Unity or you use some web browser thing or like Game Maker, it really doesn't matter because I think they're all good enough to make perfectly fine games. That's the thing. Is like at some point you had to choose the right tools to be able to, get at least 30 frames a second, showing this many polygons. Like that's not an issue unless you're, doing super crazy high-end rendering. So they're all good for learning how to make games and really for focusing on the design. To me, that was an interesting thing. This is kind of part 3 of the answer. I used to be focused on programming, especially at the beginning. And when I became independent, I realized that for the kind of games I was making, programming wasn't the bottleneck anymore. It was the game design itself. So I shifted my focus from like technology and programming to game design. And obviously I do both, but really I'm much more focused on the game design these days. So really use whatever works for you guys. What are you using right now? Because I saw your webpage of the project.
We're using Java to code the game, and we're using Photoshop to draw the art.
Okay. That totally works. Are you guys? Is it working out for you so far?
Yeah, it is. The process
Okay.
is slow though because we only have a few artists, and to make like detailed art takes a lot of time.
Right. Yep. Yeah, definitely art is usually a huge bottleneck. Just both in 2D and 3D. I mean, like now we have huge resolutions and in 3D, tons of polygons and materials. And I mean, when you look at those games that I was talking about, like Grand Theft Auto 5, you could have somebody could have spent a whole year doing like one model and texturing the whole thing and animate. I mean, usually they don't break it down that way. They like have somebody animate a bunch of things and somebody texture a bunch of things. But still, it's just crazy amount of work that goes into like things that you just walk through a room. Like, oh, that was like 6 man-months of work right there, and you just spend 30 seconds in that room. That's it. What else?
how many people downloaded Casey's Captions, and what was it like to have your game purchased by Robio?
I don't remember specifically how many people. It was pretty good given the time. I mean, this was several years ago. This was actually the same year that the iPad had just come out, and we launched it only for the iPad. Excuse me. So we chose the iPad only because it fit better with the larger surface area and whatnot. So given that it was only iPad and there weren't that many iPads at the time, still did pretty well. Apple featured it the week that it came out, so that helped a lot. I believe we were like number 1 or number 2 top sale. So for that week, maybe it was like 100,000 downloads or something like that. I mean, it was a paid game, so that was good. I think it was like $2.99 at the time. But it didn't have any in-app purchases or anything like that. So also, as soon as the week was over and the Apple feature went away and stuff, it's like downloads just dropped to very little. So there's that. Getting Rovio to purchase that, it was amazing. It's not something we even sought out. They contacted us, which was surprising. And actually, there's an interesting story there, which is, they approached us and it was very kind of unclear what they were saying, and I almost thought they wanted us to partner with them to like do some project in the future. And then eventually, when I realized like, oh, they actually want to buy the game. My first instinct was to say like, no, we're indie, we're rock, punk rock here, we're just not selling out, right? But then I remember one of the best business advice that I've ever heard from one of the owners of a company that I used to work for, Sammy Studios. He said, in business, there's never no. The answer is always, oh, maybe that's not what I had in mind. But for the right offer, I suppose it's possible, right? And that's exactly what we told him. It's like, after I get rid of my instinct, like, no, we're not selling out. What are they talking about? I don't want to sell out. It's like, well, I really don't want to, but let's hear it, right? Which is great because there's no pressure, and it puts the ball in their court to like make an offer. And in this particular case, they're like, oh, okay, well, we're glad that you're open to that. And eventually they came back with another offer, and we're like, yeah. Thank you, but no, thank you. It's and we even told them like, look, we really appreciate the offer. We're not interested, and we're not just saying this so then you can come back with like 10% more. We're not trying to haggle here. We looked at it and we're like, we really need an order of magnitude more to start talking about this. And they're like, okay, we totally understand it. That's cool, So we're totally honest with them. We went ahead and we started working on an iPhone version of Cases Contraptions. And then like, as we're about to launch that, like 2 months after that, they're like, hey, remember how you said you like for an order of magnitude more, you might be interested. So I think we can do that. I'm like, okay, let's talk about it. And that time it worked. So to me, that was the best thing. Like, there's never no, unless it's something like it's, against your principles or immoral or something. It's like, sure, I'm willing to listen.
So I know that you transitioned to an indie team from a big company. What made you want to do that, and what are the main differences in the two companies?
Sorry, I didn't catch all of that. Can you repeat it? Maybe get a little closer to the microphone. That works. Just for the question.
I know that you moved from a big company to an indie team. What made you want to do that, and what are the main differences between the two?
Oh God. Okay. Why I made the change was very easy. When I started working in the games industry, that was like 1998. A whole game was made by a team of about 10 to 12 people. I mean, that was like everybody, not just the programmers. That was like, art and design and testing and like probably like a producer. That was the whole team. And it felt right to me. I mean, it felt like, okay, I see 12 people. We can all go in a room. It's very clear what we're doing. If everybody felt like they had a big part in making the game. When I stopped working for a game company, we had, like the case that I was telling, actually a little less, but we still had like 200 people making a game and spending 3 years doing it. And it was just night and day difference. I mean, even if you're in a lead position at that point, which was always like technology lead, it's just I don't feel that I'm making a game anymore, right? I'm managing people. You're just making this tool that other people can use to generate this thing that eventually kind of becomes a game or something. So I just wanted to go back to why I wanted to make the games in the first place, kind of like when I was making games after school, stuff like that. I'm like, well, going independent, right, is the way to go. It was just the beginning of people going independent at the time. It was like 2006. Like, I think maybe World of Goo and Braid were just coming out or were about to come out. Like, were some of the first, early indie games. And that was at the time that like the PlayStation 3 downloadable was happening. We're like, okay, well, this is opportunity, right? So like, all right, let's try it. And the biggest difference was like, I knew that, it was going to be very different going from a large company to just being actually, at that point it was like just two of us. But it really made it sink in the amount of quote unquote waste and overhead of having 200 people. It's like, oh my God, we have to be super lean. And, it really started driving the point like, any amount of time you spend coding or designing has to be something that is directly relevant to the game. None of this like, I'll make a tool that generates something that makes another tool that somebody else uses to like do something. Like, no, like I'm just doing stuff in the game. Boom. It has to be very direct. And for me, I loved it. I love going back to being much more, working on the game directly. So yeah, one anecdote with that is that I quit my company in very good terms with everybody, and a few weeks later, we invited my old boss to come over and see our tiny little office that we had at the time, and had invited him over for lunch. And we're chatting over lunch, and he looks at me and he says, "You are never going back and working for a company. I can tell from your face." I'm like, "Yeah, you're right. You're right." So yeah, as long as I can, I love working by myself or just with one or two other people. Not going back. What else?
So, when building your first indie game, in what order did you create your game? Did you plan first, then program, and then do art, or did you do in a different order?
And you're asking specifically for the first one that I ever made?
Maybe actually in general.
In general.
What order would you recommend?
Okay. In general, I don't start until I have a clear idea of what I want to do. It doesn't mean that it has to be completely fleshed out at all. I'm not advocating the whole, make a big design document and stuff, but I definitely want to know like the elevator pitch, right? Like, okay, this is what your game is about, and specifically what your game is trying to accomplish. In the last few years, I realized that it's very helpful to think about not just what your game is about. Like, okay, it's a fighter, and you pick up things, so it has like RPG elements, and you're fighting, and it's set in the Middle Ages, right? That's okay, gives you an idea, but the thing that I find is super useful is to think about, how do I want the players to feel while they're playing the game? To me, that's the most important question. And it's actually a question that also helps you flesh out the design. Because once you realize that you want the players to feel whatever, like, it can be, like, there's no right answer, right? Like, different games make people feel different ways, right? Like, they can feel the typical super powerful, you're always getting more powerful and beating things, or they can make you feel empathetic about something, or they can make you feel paranoid about, and it could be a variety of feelings. Once you know that, every design question, every design decision, I can run it by that. And it's like, okay, well, here we're going to let the player choose this. Is this helping, making them feel blah, blah, blah? If the answer is no, then it's like, do we really want that? Probably not. I mean, even if it's not helping, then just cut it. Go after the things that are helping that. So, to me, that's the first thing. But that's just like a paragraph or like a sentence or two. And then I just flush it out a little bit more, like Google Docs and make like some bullet points, like, okay, these are some of the major things and stuff. And then I try to get something basic working as soon as possible. Sometimes it's a separate prototype, especially if there's something in the game that maybe I haven't done before or hasn't been done before, and I have some questions about it. And that's the important thing, that you have a specific question about, like, oh, I want a fighting game that I can pause, and then I can move the camera around, I can do whatever, I can issue orders, and then it continues. Like, that's kind of interesting, right? Like, maybe there hasn't been a game like that. So can I prototype that and I'm not kidding, can I do that in 2 or 3 days? Or I give myself a deadline, like, not spending a month or two. Like, this is not that kind of prototype. And at that point, it becomes like a stick figure or like even animation rig. Forget about skinning, forget about textures or anything like that. And I can see if that concept works. And maybe I'll be like, yeah, it sounded a lot more fun than it really is. Just throw it out and go with something else. Like, spend as little time as possible as you can on it. So sometimes I actually have to do like 5 different prototypes for different ideas. And, sometimes actually there isn't a big, huge question. I can be like, okay, let me just, instead of just making a prototype about a section of the game, let's just make let me just try to get the game up and running as quickly as possible. Like, whatever, grab clip art from the internet, or graphics from another game, or whatever. It doesn't matter. Actually, I like clip art better, because that way you're not tempted to make it look good in any way. It's just like proof of concept. And that depends on the game. Sometimes it can take a week to get something up and running. Sometimes it can take a little longer. Sometimes it can take a little less. And I know some people advocate for eventually you throw that out as well. Like, okay, yeah, your basic workflow and then the basic flow of the game works. Throw it out and start over and do it right. To be honest, with my last several games, I just did that and then I just kept building on it. I think maybe throwing it away makes more sense again when you're like, do a proof of concept and now like, okay, now I need it to have a team of 300 people doing this. Obviously, this is not a base that we can all work from, right? But if it's just me and one other guy, then that's fine. We can just keep very quickly making changes and throw that out and replace it with this. So we actually always just pretty much built the prototype. Like the last game that I made, Subterfuge, up until launch, the folder website was still called like Subterfuge Prototype. We never got around to changing the name of it. So we just kept building it. So yeah, the key thing for me is getting the basis up and running. And even Subterfuge, I don't know if you guys are familiar with it. That was the last game I made. It was a mobile game. It was a multiplayer only game that is up to 10 players, and it's a real time game that takes place probably over 2 weeks, 10 to 2 weeks, 10 days to 2 weeks. Which you're like, okay, it may sound like a more technically complicated kind of game, but we actually had, from the moment we decided, yeah, we're going to do it, and we had the feelings of the players and roughly the ideas, we actually got a basic, very, very bare bones app working in about a week. I think it was under 2 weeks. And, there were like almost no rules. It was just like you had nodes in a map and you could send units. We didn't even know what the units were going to be. It didn't matter. It just sent units from one place to another. But it was already working with a server and, like it was just a proof of concept. And then it just makes it really cool because you're like, okay, now we design on the fly with the game there. So we're like, oh, what, we think of a feature. Like, what if we add this thing to the units and blah, blah, blah. And we think through it a little bit, like, yeah, that sounds like a good idea. Or how about this? How about this? We're like, okay, we're going to try this. And then you spend a day and you try that feature in the game. And you're like, that sounds good. Or like, no, that's bad. And just revert that thing. Boom. And so the design, for me, always happens making the changes directly in the game. Again, it's not the kind of thing you can do when you have 300 people, right? Because those things require a lot of assets and require a lot of people working and coordination. So the workflow is completely different. And when I say 300 people, like I'm putting you guys, like how many are you in your team? Like 6?
We have 6, but we also have people who aren't here, so we have like a total of like 8 maybe.
Okay, still 8. You can, it's kind of like when I started working, it was like I had the team of 12. You can totally still work with that kind of, iterative approach as opposed to, just much more full design and then let's implement this feature all the way, and always asking, like, is this the right thing? Should we change it? Should we cut it? I'm a fan of like, as we're working on things and maybe thinking of new features, going back and thinking, is this still something we really want? Is this adding to the game? And if not, chop it. And I'm a fan of simplicity. Anything in both in coding and design. Anything that is not adding, pulling its own weight, just cut it. So that's how I make games. It also takes me a long time for some reason. So maybe that's related. A long time for me. Like I'm always frustrated because I want to be making games in like 6 months. When I see people, other indie developers doing that, it's like I'm envious, and my games always end up taking a year or two. So
I think the guys have one more question about advertising and publicizing
okay.
your games, and then I think I'll open up to Ms. Bednarsic's class because they had, I think, poured over your blog, and I think they have some questions too. So I'll you guys ask the last question, then we'll open it up to Ms. Bednarcic.
Okay. So what is the question about advertising?
Basically, how do you advertise your game without spoiling too much about the story? For an RPG, because
my games don't have story built in, so I don't have a problem there. Actually, I'm not a fan personally. Just that's a personal thing. People are, but I'm not a fan of games that go out and tell a story. Like to me, that's what movies are for, or books are for. I love games in which a story emerges that the player somehow creates. So the game that I'm working on right now is called Lasting Legacy. And we're hoping that as people play through, there's like a story that comes out and they see it as like, oh, you married the drunk brother of, blah, 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 and he ruined the family, but then you found something, whatever. Like all this involved stories. So in my case, there's never a fear of spoiling a story. And I'm always in favor of talking about the games as much as possible. I mean, I think it's good for people to know what they're getting into. I try to start talking about the games as early as I can in the development process. If it were up to me, I would start even earlier. But it's also good to have some good visuals. So we always kind of have to wait until like, okay, we have some okay art already in the game, and now we can start showing screenshots and videos and stuff like that. So yeah, we try to do that as soon as possible. As for advertising, or just marketing in general, that's a really difficult question. It's a really difficult thing to do. Nobody really knows how to do it. It depends on the game. It depends on your audience. So I always try to at least start with just talking about the game. It gets our other developers interested and somehow spreads the word little by little. I think trying to get some kind of early access community is a really good way to go. We did that with Subterfuge, not with like Steam necessarily. Steam early access was just like we got early beta testers, and they were playing with each other, and then they invited friends to come in. So that kind of thing helps a lot. But it really depends a lot on the game. I mean, you can't do that with maybe a single player game or a more casual game. So you really have to tailor things. I think the whole putting ads up on the internet just doesn't work. For the kind of games, small teams, the kind of revenue that we're talking about. I mean, it might work if you're, again, Grand Theft Auto and Rockstar doing those kind of things. But yeah, marketing is just really, really, really difficult. I mean, the biggest question today, the biggest challenge today is not how do I code the game, is how do I make the art, like how do I make the engine. Like there are tools to all those things. The hardest challenge today is how do I make sure people know that I made a really great game, right? I mean, first you need to make a great game. That's step one. But then it's like, how do you let people know, and how do you get them excited to play it? I don't know the answer. I wish I did. If I did, I would be super rich. Nobody knows the answer to that, and it keeps changing. I mean, what worked a year ago, 2 years ago, it doesn't work today. I mean, at some point, when I started stuff on the iPhone, it was great. Like, it was only like, the big companies were just laughing. Mobile, that's stupid, like they were just doing console stuff. And like, so we were just going to town and there was a demand, and you could put out things very easily and people find it and download it and buy it. Eventually big companies figured that out, and they saturated all the channels and all the advertising and all that. So it's changing all the time.
All right.
Thank you.
Yes,
thank you.
Yep.
We'll open up to the NAR6 class, or any of my other students that are here. If you have any other questions, so don't be shy.
Nope. Nobody else? Oh, yeah. Okay.
Do you have anything you want to ask our group?
Okay, sure. How far are you guys along? Because I saw the webpage of your project. Looked really awesome. So I guess really my pointed question is, do you have something playable already?
That webpage is a terrible representation of what we have.
Okay.
So in reality, we have a Google Doc and stuff with all the concept for the game basically planned out, and like you said about how the player should feel and all that. We have that all planned out, but in the actual development of the game, we don't have anything.
Okay.
We have a little prototype. It's just like very bad art, very bad kind of skins. We use Ben.
A small prototype.
Yeah, Ben managed to program it with Java, and you can pretty much move this little character around who shoots these random things at times, and then you have a certain amount of health, and you break it apart.
What I'm also making along with it is a sort of map editor thing to make it easier to place entities down. So. So it just, whenever you place things in the map editor, it writes to a text file that basically the game picks up. And so, yeah.
Cool. Yeah, I mean, to me, getting that stage, getting something playable and something moving and stuff, it's super important. Is where I would try to go there every time. Honestly, I would even prioritize eventually you definitely want to do the level editor and all those things, but early on, sometimes the way I would do something like that is okay, let's just deal with the text file format. Let's do it by hand, some stuff, and let's make sure that works in the game. And then once you get enough things and all that, then you can make a tool that actually generates all those things. Just because personally, I just value seeing the basic design starting to evolve in the screen and getting something playable, just very highly. So, but it sounds like you guys have something along those ways, along those lines. So that's cool.
Thank you.
Anybody else? Any other questions?
I'll ask one.
Do you have access to our team drive? Can you do that?
I did not give him access to that. If you guys are okay with that, we
Yeah.
could. Okay. All right. So, Mr. Lopez, if it's okay, again, we're not asking for free consulting, but I guess we sort of are. If you could maybe like peruse their team drive, their Google Team Drive, and anytime you have to give them feedback, I think the guys would appreciate that. So
Sure. Yeah. Send it over.
awesome. Thank you. All right.
Yeah.
And then we have a question.
My question would be like, what are some tips you have on being efficient? Because I know like starting, especially now for us, there's a lot of things that we need to like go over, and we keep going over it back and we haven't gotten started. So what would you have any tips for that?
Specifically thinking about what? Are you thinking of just programming or design, or just like coordinating everything? Like when you say efficient.
So like we don't waste time like going over features or something that we don't need.
I guess just being, honestly, some of that comes with experience, right? Like knowing where to focus. But I guess just being aware that you need to be efficient is good, and just focusing on, just something that at the beginning sounds ridiculous, like little steps, like like saying, okay, let's just focus. Like once you have those basic ideas and the feelings and all that, like okay. What is the smallest thing that we can possibly do that it's meaningful or something? It's like, okay, we have a character moving in the screen and jumping around. Like, okay, no enemies, nothing for now. That's fine. And then, so maybe even have everybody focus on that. And then, like, let's add something like, okay, well, let's do collision detection. Okay, and so now with that comes some levels or something, and then, so the idea is like bring in specific small concepts of the game and then just focus on that, and maybe even have it's a little harder with like 12 people, but try to have as many people involved in that as possible, as opposed to some people, okay, well, I'm going to be writing the story that's going to be happening 3 chapters from now, and I'm going to be doing this other thing, and I'm going to do this other thing. So it can be hard to coordinate with 12 people. It's not the same thing as if you have 2 or just one person. But yeah, the more you focus on on very specific things that will be visible in that game prototype, or drop the prototype in that game that you're making, the better, I think. I think that helps focus a lot of people's attention a lot too. Like, okay, we are doing this. By the end of the week, we want to see this. I want to see the guy, shooting bullets, or getting a new weapon or whatever. Does that make sense?
Yeah.
We might have one more quick one. I don't know if anybody else has. Okay, all right. One more from Dan.
So are there any cliches that we should avoid in designing the video game? Like in terms of, I know you don't like story, but I don't know if you know any like story cliches that we should avoid or stuff like that.
Sure, avoid all cliches. So actually, when I said earlier how do you make people know about your game, and how do you make them want to buy your game? I think for teams of our size, one of the answers to that is to make a gaming experience that they can't get anywhere else. So if you try to make something like, oh, what is the hot game today on the App Store or Steam, and then you try to make a version of that somehow you think is a little better, you're not only are you competing directly with a game, but you're probably competing with all the other games that are in the similar genre, and all the other games that they're in development right now. They're trying to copy that game because it's the hot thing. So by the time you come out, not only are there 200 other games, but people are already tired of that anyway. So sometimes by offering something very different and unique, and you'll get people noticing your game and be like, oh, I want to play that, and there isn't quite any other way to do that. Like with Subterfuge was kind of like that. There was there was pretty much like if you wanted a real time game that lasted for 2 weeks, you had our game or Neptune's Pride on the web, on a web browser. The game I'm making right now, it's you're managing a family tree by family by looking at the family tree. It's pretty unique. So that helps a lot. And it also it usually means it's a more personal game. So just from an artistic point of view, it's your own creation. You're putting something to it other than this is the hot thing. On the other hand, I think for a game project for a class like this, I think it's perfectly fine just to try to copy something, because the point of it is that you're learning, right? So if you're learning to make a game, I think at the beginning it's great just to copy a simple game if you want to, as opposed to try to kind of step into myself a little bit. But I think that's a mistake that I see a lot. Is like sometimes people without the necessary experience, they're like, they've never made a game, and they're like, I'm going to make the absolute best ever game, and they're just setting themselves up for failure. At the very beginning, I think it's great just to copy a game, because you're going to be like, oh, that's how they do that. Oh, that makes sense. That's why they do this. So just by copying a game, you actually internalize a lot of things and you learn a lot of things. And then you can save it for game 2, not to try to make the ultimate game, but to now, like, okay, with what you've taken, now you can make something more personal, more unique, more creative. So that's a good way to go.
Okay, I think we're going to wrap up. But Mr. Lopez, I did want to say thank you so much for taking the time to video conference with us. And I'd be neglectful if I didn't give a shout out to our mutual friend Jody, who through social media, so that we could arrange this. But anyway, so I'll give a plug to your blog again. It's gamesfromwithin.com. Our website is bhshelpdesk.com. Thank you for watching episode 36 of Help Desk Live from Burlington High School. And so we'll just sign off. So thanks again.
Thank you.
Yeah, thanks for having me. Bye-bye.
Take care. Bye.